but I'm being careful not to destroy my brush as I'm laying in these darker tones. It would be really easy to mash into this with the brush, but then I wouldn't get the fine point when I want it. And the reason I'm doing this form so bold up here is I want to stop your eye. I want a diagonal to cut off that corner so that your eye's not going to just go flipping off the page over there. And I'll go in and do a bit more detail work on this tree when I go in with my pen.
Steve, what kind of tree did you say goes down versus up?
Say again?
The branches down versus up? What are those?
This is like more likely a conifer tree. The branches will tend to come out either straight from the trunk or toward the base of the tree. They'll sometimes bend down after they've lost their needles. And I love that form. It's also a very New England form, which is what I've grown up with. So I just sort of naturally gravitate to working with that. And then I'm going to lay in a little bit of suggestion of other other detail back here of down trees and broken brush and so on. And I'm not going to go into any real detail. Part of the art of making drawings like this is just suggesting forms that the reader's eye will fill out. Because I really want to make the focal point this creature. So that's where I'm going to try to really delineate the forms with real clarity. Okay, now I got to get doing some stuff down by this beach edge, and I've really soaked my brush with ink on purpose because now there's two things happening here. There's the water's edge, which I want to delineate clearly enough that it reads as being at the edge of the body of water. And I have this creature's form, which is underwater, and I need to imply a reflection. So this is three different levels that we're drawing at. Now my brush is starting to do the dry brush thing, which is right where I want it to go in and do this kind of thing. So I'm using the dry brush now to indicate what's under the water. And you'll also notice that I didn't worry about lining up the forms too closely, because if you set a pencil or a stick into a jar of water, light refracts, and forms do not line up perfectly above and below the water. So I want to work with that optical illusion a little bit. It's one of those things that we're not conscious of, but if I lined it up perfectly, it wouldn't look correct. Your unconscious would know that there was some kind of a cheat going on there. Okay, so I've got a suggestion of the creature's form underwater, but I also have to get a suggestion of the reflection. So to do that, I'm going to bang in some stronger black on this part of the form. And I'm working with pretty blunt strokes here, in part because I want this thing to look massive right at this point. But I'm suggesting a scale pattern. And the only place I'm really going to make sure I get a sharp edge is right where it meets the water. Right there. Okay, I've got to have a reflection that's going to measure that, include that dark space. And I've got to be fairly bold about putting it in, because if I don't use these kind of loose strokes, it's not going to look like a rippling watery surface. That work for you? Now, I want to do something similar over here. So I'm going to go in. Again, I've soaked my ink with, my brush with a lot of ink, because I want this to be fairly bold over here. But you can also see I'm doing it with a little more care than I did over here. because I really don't want to start putting in so much detail that I'm locking myself into a very specific scale pattern, because I want to save that for when I go in with my pen. That's just about where I want. Now, because of the nature of a reflective surface of water, there would be a reflection from that. And I can't worry that it's going to confuse this form under the water, because two different things are happening here. Now, these reflections have to follow the form of the top of the surface of the water, where these ripples are. So I'm going to go back in a little bit now and make sure that that's what they're moving with, that they're parallel to these ripples up here. And I've got some room for error here, because remember, I'm going back in with whiteout at the end to really pull this stuff out. But I think you can see how I'm altering that line now, so it's going with the surface of the water. And I don't want dry brush, because dry brush is not going to look wet enough. I want my brush wet. How's that? Does that work for your eye? Now, I've also got this form that would create a reflection, but I can't get too into the accuracy of reflections. All I need to do is make sure that these forms work for you, because if I start getting into this, I'm going to make a mess of this drawing. It's just going to get too confusing. What you might see in a photograph, if you were one of those people lucky enough to get a photo of this thing, is not what you want to worry about with the drawing. A drawing is, by its nature, an abstraction. So you just focus on the details that you feel are essential for the patterns you want to make clear for the eye. So I've got enough of a sense of the water there that I'm not going to do much more with the brush on the water, because I could really make a mess of things pretty quickly. But I am going to go in and do a little bit to at least connect these parts of the lake. And I want to lay in some textures that are specific to the surface of the lake to pull this drawing together. And I'm not going to do much in the back with a brush, because I want to save that for a pen. See how that kind of pulls things together with just a few strokes? Now, the other thing that would be happening by the side of a lake would be, there would be a reflection of the larger rocks that are right up against the edge. So I want to, before I can monkey with the reflections, I want to make sure I get a little more detail on the rocks themselves. And I've been saving putting in these blacks so that I could kind of make sure that they meshed with the black areas on the creature. And now I'm going to go in, and these I'm going to work really loose. It's just enough to suggest the reflections. Because these reflections are important. If they're not there, the absence is going to bother you. But I don't need to put the kind of attention to them that I do with the reflections of the creature. Because again, the focus of this drawing is not the rocks, it's the creature. And that helps pull together the illusion of a lakeshore. Now, this is still pretty rough, because I'm just working with the brush at this stage. I'm still going to go in with my pen. But this is the point now where I've got to go in and solve some drawing problems. For instance, this serpent's body comes up, goes around this way, and then comes up here. And it goes from being a cylinder going in this direction to a cylinder going in this direction. I have to render that shift without flattening this out into a two-dimensional form. That makes sense? You understand what I'm talking about? So I've got to be careful with how I'm going to render that bend in the creature's neck. And part of it is, I want to make sure that I set a pattern for myself that I can follow through all the way. So what I'm going to do is, using my brush, catch the edge of the wet scales